There are four words, four harmless-sounding words. Words that have quietly ended more dreams than failure ever could. Not because they are wrong, but because they feel right. I already know that. You've said it. I've said it. Everyone who believes they are intelligent has said it. We say it when someone offers advice we've heard before. We say it when a truth feels too simple to matter. We say it when growth threatens our ego. And the moment those words are spoken, learning stops. Growth freezes. Life stays exactly the same. Not because we don't know enough, but because we refuse to begin again. This is not a story about ignorance. This is a story about intelligence without wisdom, about knowledge without transformation, about a man who knew everything about life but understood nothing, until one quiet lesson changed him forever. This is the story of Daniel.
Daniel was not an ordinary man. He was intelligent, brilliant even, the kind of person people listened to when he spoke, the kind of person who always had an answer. His shelves were filled with books, philosophy, psychology, history, spirituality. Every page highlighted, every quote remembered. He could explain discipline, he understood purpose, he knew the value of patience, gratitude, humility, and focus. If wisdom were measured by vocabulary, Daniel would have been a master. And yet, every morning he woke up with a quiet heaviness in his chest. Not panic, not sadness, just emptiness. He knew what to do with his life, but somehow his life never changed. Daniel gave advice that inspired others, but his own days felt repetitive, predictable, unfulfilled. He spoke about mindfulness, yet his mind was always restless. He taught discipline, yet struggled to stay consistent. He understood peace, yet rarely felt it. And this contradiction confused him deeply. How can I know so much and still feel so stuck? From the outside, Daniel looked successful. From the inside, he felt like a library no one lived in, full of knowledge, empty of wisdom. Whenever someone tried to guide him, a mentor, a teacher, even a friend, Daniel listened politely. He nodded, he smiled, and silently he thought to himself, I already know that. Those four words became his shield. They protected him from embarrassment, from humility, from starting at the beginning again. Because admitting you don't know is terrifying, especially when your identity is built on being smart. Daniel didn't realize it yet, but his greatest strength had quietly become his greatest obstacle. His mind was full, overflowing, and a full cup has no room for anything new. This was the moment before everything changed, before certainty cracked, before wisdom entered, before Daniel discovered a truth that would unsettle him forever. Knowing the path is not the same as walking it.
Daniel didn't say it out loud. He rarely had to. It lived quietly in his mind, ready to appear whenever someone tried to teach him something simple. I already know that. When a speaker talked about discipline, Daniel nodded. When someone spoke about consistency, he agreed. When a mentor mentioned humility, patience, or focus, he smiled. Of course he knew that. He had read it before, highlighted it before, quoted it before. And because the words were familiar, he believed the lesson was finished. But something strange kept happening. No matter how much Daniel knew, his life remained unchanged. The same patterns returned, the same frustrations followed him, the same inner restlessness greeted him every morning. It was as if his mind was moving forward, but his life was standing still. Daniel didn't realize that those four words weren't a sign of intelligence, they were a signal of resistance. "I already know that" didn't mean "I understand." It meant I refuse to listen again. It closed the door before the lesson could even enter. Because real learning doesn't begin with agreement, it begins with humility. But humility feels uncomfortable when your identity is built on being smart. So Daniel protected himself. He protected his image. He protected his certainty. He protected the version of himself that always had answers. And slowly, without noticing, his mind became crowded. Ideas stacked on top of ideas, concepts layered over concepts, truths buried under familiarity. His cup was full, so full that when life tried to pour something new into him, nothing stayed. Everything spilled away. And Daniel mistook this stagnation for stability. He told himself he was fine, that growth takes time, that he just needed to learn a little more. But deep down, something whispered a quiet truth. Knowing wasn't changing him, and knowing alone never would.
Daniel met the gardener by accident, or at least that's what he believed. The place was quiet, far from lectures, books, and discussions, just land, soil, and silence. An old man knelt beside the earth, hands stained with dirt, moving slowly, deliberately, as if time had no urgency here. Daniel watched for a moment. The garden wasn't impressive, no perfect symmetry, no exotic plants, just life growing at its own pace. "You seem thoughtful," the gardener said, without looking up. Daniel politely smiled. "I think a lot," he replied. The gardener nodded. "Thinking is easy," he said. "Living is harder." Daniel paused. That sentence was simple, too simple. "I already know that," Daniel almost said. Instead, he asked, "What do you grow here?" The gardener stood and brushed the soil from his hands. "Whatever the season allows," he answered. Daniel frowned slightly. "But surely you follow a method, a system, some principle." The gardener smiled. "I follow the garden," he said. Daniel began explaining about strategy, planning, optimization, discipline, about how growth could be improved, accelerated, perfected. The gardener listened patiently, didn't interrupt, didn't correct him. When Daniel finished, there was a long silence. Then the gardener asked one question, "And how is your garden?" Daniel opened his mouth to answer and stopped, because for the first time, he didn't know what to say. The gardener looked at him kindly. "You know many things," he said softly, "but knowing is not the same as growing." Daniel felt something shift inside him, not understanding, discomfort. And discomfort, for the first time in a long while, felt like the beginning of learning.
The gardener invited Daniel to sit. They moved to a small wooden table beneath the shade of a tree. The air was still, quiet in a way that made thoughts louder. Without a word, the gardener lifted a kettle and began to pour tea into Daniel's cup. The cup filled quickly. And then, without stopping, the tea continued to flow. It spilled over the edge, ran down the sides, soaked into the wood below. "Wait," Daniel said, surprised. "The cup is full." The gardener kept pouring. "Can't you see?" Daniel said, irritation rising. "It's overflowing." Only then did the gardener stop. He placed the kettle down gently and looked at Daniel. "This," he said, "is your mind." Daniel frowned. "It's full," the gardener continued, "full of ideas, full of explanations, full of conclusions." Daniel glanced at the cup. "But when a cup is already full," the gardener said,
Where can anything new go? Daniel said nothing. You come to learn, the gardener went on, but you bring your certainty with you. You hear words, but you don't receive them. You recognize ideas, but you don't let them change you. The gardener pushed the empty kettle aside. To learn something new, he said, you must first empty your cup. The words settled slowly. Not like information, like truth. For the first time, Daniel understood something without being able to explain it. And that frightened him. Because it meant everything he thought he knew might be getting in the way.
The next morning, the gardener took Daniel deeper into the land. They stopped before the first garden. At a glance, it looked impressive. Every plant had a label. Every row was neatly marked. Signs explained what should grow, how it should grow, and why it mattered. Daniel felt comfortable here. This garden made sense. These are the names of the plants, the gardener said, their histories, their classifications. Daniel nodded. I recognize all of this, he said. I've studied it. Yes, the gardener replied. You know this garden very well. But as they walked closer, something felt wrong. The soil was dry. The leaves were pale. The roots were shallow. Nothing was truly alive. This garden, the gardener said, is filled with knowledge. Daniel looked again. It has explanations, definitions, concepts, theories, but it does not have care. The gardener knelt and let the soil run through his fingers. Knowing the name of a plant does not make it grow. Daniel swallowed, because for the first time he saw his own mind reflected in the dirt. Beautiful on the surface, organized, impressive, and quietly barren.
They walked farther. The path grew uneven, the ground rough beneath their feet. Soon they arrived at another garden. This one looked alive. Plants reached upward, leaves spread wide, the soil was dark and rich. But the garden felt chaotic. Some plants crowded others. Some were overwatered. Some were struggling to survive. A man worked tirelessly among them. He moved quickly, constantly adjusting, digging, planting, pulling. Sweat ran down his face, but he did not stop. This gardener works very hard, Daniel said. Yes, the old gardener replied. He never rests. Daniel watched longer. Despite the effort, nothing seemed balanced. Growth happened, but so did exhaustion. This garden is action, the gardener said, effort without awareness. The man worked from sunrise to sunset, yet the garden never truly thrived. He knows he must act, the gardener continued, but he does not listen. Daniel felt a quiet recognition. He had lived here too, busy, driven, always doing, mistaking movement for progress. This garden teaches a hard lesson, the gardener said. Action without understanding will drain you before it fulfills you. Daniel nodded slowly, because he knew the feeling well.
They continued in silence. The air changed. The path softened beneath their feet, as if the ground itself had learned patience. Then they arrived. The third garden was simple. No signs, no labels, no rushing hands, just plants growing naturally. Each had space, each had light, each had exactly what it needed. The gardener did not hurry here. He moved slowly, touching leaves, observing the soil, listening. This garden is being, he said. Daniel felt his breath slow. "This garden is not forced," the gardener continued. "It is understood. Nothing here was excessive. Nothing was neglected. The gardener watered when needed, pruned when necessary, and waited when waiting was required. This garden knows the rhythm of life," he said. "Not too much, not too little." Daniel stood quietly. For the first time, he did not feel the urge to explain. He did not need to label. He did not need to improve. He simply observed. And in that stillness, something inside him softened. "This," the gardener said gently, "is wisdom. Not stored in the mind, not spoken in words, but lived, moment by moment." Daniel realized then what he had been missing all along. Not more knowledge, but the courage to live what he already knew.
The gardener led Daniel to a small clearing. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a young sapling. Daniel leaned closer. "It's small," he said. "It's fragile, easily broken." "Yes," the gardener replied. "And yet it grows faster than the oldest tree you've seen." Daniel frowned. "Why?" "Because it begins as it is," the gardener said softly, "without assumptions, without resistance, without knowing too much." Daniel thought about this. He had spent years accumulating knowledge. He had memorized principles, quoted philosophers, studied strategies, and yet he rarely grew. "Beginners have a gift," the gardener continued. "They listen, they watch, they ask questions. They do not carry the weight of certainty. Their cup is empty enough to receive life itself." Daniel felt a pang of discomfort. He realized that his mind, his full, overflowing mind, was heavy with certainty, too heavy to bend, too heavy to learn. And that, the gardener said, is why those 4 words, "I already know that," are dangerous. They close the door before the lesson enters. They stop growth before it begins. Daniel's heart quickened. He had always believed knowing was enough. Now he saw that humility, true beginner's mind, was the key to transformation. "You do not need more information," the gardener said. "You need presence, awareness, the courage to start again." Daniel nodded slowly. A seed of understanding took root, fragile but alive.
The following days were quiet. Daniel practiced what the gardener had taught him. At first, it was difficult, unnatural, even humiliating. He chose one principle, a single simple truth he had always understood but never lived. Patience, consistency, humility. Each morning he repeated it to himself. Each day he applied it. Not perfectly, not elegantly, but intentionally. And slowly, something shifted. The heaviness in his chest began to lift. His thoughts, once crowded, grew clearer. Small victories, the sapling's steady growth, the orderly soil, the quiet moments started to feel meaningful. Daniel realized that change was not dramatic. It was subtle, quiet, almost imperceptible. But it was real. He no longer measured himself by what he knew. He measured himself by what he lived, by what he embodied. And with each passing day, the words that had once held him back, "I already know that," lost their power. They became reminders, not barriers. Reminders to listen, to start again, to grow. Daniel understood at last. Small, consistent steps lived daily are far more powerful than the grandest knowledge left unpracticed. And in that realization, he felt the first true taste of freedom. not from learning, but from being. Daniel stood in the garden, the morning sun warming his face. He had learned that knowing without living was empty, that effort without awareness led only to frustration, that wisdom was not in books, lectures, or clever words, but in simple, daily action. The gardener approached and spoke gently. "Now it is your turn. Take what you know and bring it to life." Daniel nodded. He remembered the words he had once whispered in arrogance. "I already know that." Now, they no longer carried pride. They carried awareness. "You will begin with one principle," the gardener said. "Choose what you know but have not lived. Practice it every day for 7 days. Observe the difference between knowing and being." Daniel felt a quiet excitement, a humility that made him stronger. For 7 days, he applied the lesson. He stumbled. He remembered. He corrected himself. He persisted. And slowly, his life began to shift. He became more present, more patient, more alive. The smallest actions, lived consistently, revealed a truth far greater than any theory. Growth is not in what you know. Growth is in what you do. Growth is in who you become.
Daniel looked at the garden one last time. He saw the first garden, full of knowledge but barren. He saw the second garden, full of effort but chaotic. He saw the third garden, simple, quiet, thriving. He understood. The cup of the mind must be emptied to receive life. The ego must step aside for humility. The mind must be willing to start again. Daniel smiled, finally at peace, not because he knew more, not because he had mastered every lesson, but because he had begun to live what he already knew. And now, it was your turn. What principle have you ignored? What lesson have you skipped because you thought you already knew it? Empty your cup. Begin again. Grow not by what you collect, but by what you embody. The beginner who lives one truth is wiser than the expert who knows 1,000. The choice is yours. Begin today.